Happy to welcome George Siegal to the podcast. George, how are you?
Fantastic, Derek. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I know we've been kind of talking over the last little bit, and I know you've been hard at work on a documentary film that I'm excited to talk with you about. And then I've had my own production things going on, so glad that we could finally connect.
I am too. I know I had to cancel a couple times on you, and you've been very gracious about rescheduling. You know how it is when you're making a film. There's so many little things that come up that sometimes take your attention away from other things that you want to do. But it's a pain, but it's also part of the fun of doing it. So it's all good.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because the unpredictability can add some excitement to the process. I know sometimes it does not, but it's like you have all these things planned out, and then something comes along that may not necessarily derail what you have planned, but it can add a nice little flair that you didn't expect.
Absolutely. And when you see credits in a film, and you see like on a bigger film, you see 500 or 1,000 names, they're all doing something. And when you're a smaller crew, you have less people doing that. And so you have to make sure every shot is clear. Do you have releases from everybody? Do you have permission to use certain things? So but by the time you see the film at home or in a theater, there's a lot that went on to get it there. And, some challenges are good. Sometimes you have to change things. We had to change some shots in the film. We had to reword some things so we wouldn't get in trouble. And that's how it's all part of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially in the indie film world, if you're having to use the phrase "wear a lot of hats,"
Yeah.
it can get kind of crazy. And when we were shooting my wife's short film last month, our sound guy had a brilliant idea. You get just a plain black hat, but you have like the Velcro strip at the top where you could put director, and then if you have to do something else, you rip that off, put producer on it. I'm like, that's a pretty brilliant invention.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And you'll see on a smaller project, you'll see some of the same names in the credits doing a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I wore 5 different hats, so I'll put 5 credits in. And I was fortunate enough to work with a really talented crew here in Tampa, Florida. And I love working with people that take an idea that you have and make it better. You can't do these things alone. And when you give it to other creative people and then your idea grows, it's really exciting.
I've been curious about the filmmaking scene down there because I live in Pensacola, so I live on kind of the opposite end of the state. But I've heard good things about the Sunscreen Film Festival, I think it's called.
Yeah, my last film, I didn't get in there. I hope to get in with this one because our film is all about Florida and it was shot in Florida. So, we should have a shot at that, but it's very competitive. There's a lot of talented people in this business. And so, the ones you think you're going to get in, you don't always get in. And then the ones you think are a long shot, sometimes you get surprised. It's very humbling when you send your work out and rely on people judging it and selecting you. But I hope we can be a part of that. It's a really good festival, I hear.
Hopefully so. So let's take it back to the beginning. What was it that made you want to get into the film industry in the first place? Because I use this analogy a lot on the show. There's not like a how-to guidebook, or you remember those classic like idiot's guide to computer software, whatever the case may be. There's not one of those for filmmaking, and that's kind of the charm of it. Is people come from so many different avenues. How did you get into it?
Well, I was in television news. I was a TV weatherman for 14 years, and I also hosted a morning show and did a bunch of every job you could do in front of the camera. Also, you write your own stuff. You're your own producer. And so when I got out of that business, you have to reinvent yourself. So I started a video production company, and I came up with a couple series ideas. It's very hard to sell those. I had a lot of clients that would make commercials and marketing videos, but I said, I want to try something to be a little more expressive, be more creative with ideas. So I started making documentary films. So the one, Built to Last Buyer Beware, will actually be my third one. And it's dealing with a subject that brings together a lot of the things I did when I was in the news business. As a weatherman, you're telling people hurricanes are coming, and then you go out and cover them, and you talk about the damage that happens, and you meet the victims and how their lives are destroyed. And so it's very important to me to wake people up to the dangers of the simple process of buying a house. You think you're buying your happily ever after kingdom, and more often than not, it doesn't go that way. And especially it doesn't go that way when there's a disaster. And people think, well, the builder's got to be good. They built this house. It looks so nice. Nah, it's not necessarily the case. And then you think, well, my insurance company will step in and help me if something goes wrong because that's what I'm paying them for. And, Jake from State Farm is going to come and save me. It's not always that way either. And so what we're saying is built to last, probably not. And buyer beware, because you better know a lot of stuff. You better be on your A game and do a lot more work than you think you have to do, or you could lose everything.
And I think that's what makes documentary filmmaking so great. And I love the narrative stuff, don't get me wrong. You could tell great stories and really kind of capture that human connection with narrative storytelling. But with documentary films, there's something about just the raw reality. Like even, like no matter how good the production quality can be, you still get that raw emotional feel from real stories. Like you really feel like you're there when you're watching a documentary. So what was it about this specific topic that drew you into wanting to make this film happen?
Well, as somebody who lives in Florida, every year we have to worry about hurricane season. And it's that time from June to the end of November where you're really just rolling the dice. You're saying it's not going to happen to me. And every year somebody loses that game and it happens to them. And so when you see something like that, it's like, what do we do? How do you wake people up to the fact that they need to know about this? And so, when I've screened the film for some people think it's a little dark and concerning because it scares them. And I said, well, good. Then we did our job. Because if you come away from watching our film going, everything's fine, I don't have to do anything, then as a filmmaker, I don't think I laid out my position. And I don't like opinion films. I don't like political films where, a Republican or a Democrat made it. I made this film as a homeowner. So everybody has to agree. If you're anti what I'm talking about, I don't know who you are. So now you have this huge audience and it's like, okay, here is the problem. Let's do something about it. And that's what you hope to do with a documentary. There's art films like The March of the Penguins. We're not going to save the penguins by watching that movie. You watch it because it's beautiful. It's well shot. They were out in the freezing cold weather and it's amazing how they got all that stuff together. And you love listening to Morgan Freeman. But some films clearly have a slant. You know who made it and what they're pushing. I'm pushing for all of you. Anybody that owns a home or lives in an apartment, I think you're going to need to watch this and wake up. If you come away getting better insurance, if you come away choosing a safer neighborhood, then I'll feel like I did my job.
Yeah, and it's something that it's not, as you mentioned. Like I'm right there with you with the political stuff because you always feel like they're trying to push some kind of agenda. This doesn't. This isn't like a political party kind of thing. It's a human thing. We all have things that we share together,
Yeah.
no matter what you believe in. And as a fellow Florida resident, I know all too well about hurricanes because it's like when June 1st hits, you start tracking the weather a little bit more. You start watching the Weather Channel a little more, thinking, is this the year that something major hits? And there have been some communities not too far from where I live that are still recovering. And you think of Hurricane Michael back in, I think it was 2019.
Mm-hmm.
There's some areas around the Mariana area that have never and will never recover from it. So I think it's awesome that you're bringing awareness to stuff like that.
Yeah, go to Mexico Beach. I mean, to me, that we went there after Hurricane Michael. The film before this, The Last House Standing, we featured that house that was on the beach in Mexico Beach that truly was the last house standing in that area, and everything around it was wiped out. And I saw how they're rebuilding because we went there for this most recent film. And they actually increased the building code right after Michael hit and said, okay, we're going to have a moratorium. We're going to build safer houses. We're going to do it a certain way. And people got mad at the city council and they rescinded the tougher building codes. And it's now more lax than it was before Hurricane Michael in how you can build in Mexico Beach. And so I'm watching when Hurricane Debbie recently came to Florida. I'm going, God, if that hits Mexico Beach and it gains strength, these people are screwed. They didn't rebuild to survive a Category 5 hurricane, and that's what wiped them out. And so I feel like I have a personal vested interest in places like Mexico Beach, Fort Myers, Sanibel Island. And then where I live in Tampa, we're like the next great bullseye of hurricanes. Since I've lived here, there's been two or three that they say could have wiped us out if they had hit us. If Ian had hit us, if we would have been devastated by it. It would have just, they said the damage that you saw in Southwest Florida would have paled in comparison to what would have happened here because the population is so much greater. And it just makes me realize we're crazy, first of all, living here, but it is paradise. So you roll the dice. But the analogy I use in the film that I really like is a roulette wheel. If you took everything you had and you walked into a casino and put it on a roulette wheel, and you're betting on one spin of the wheel what your future is going to be, would you do it? And on our roulette wheel, there's one happily ever after tab and everything else that can go wrong, from fires, floods, you name it, sinkholes, everything that could happen to you. And there's one safe space. Would you take that bet? We
Oh,
do.
absolutely not.
Yeah. So
No.
that's what we do. But that's what we do as Floridians.
Yeah.
That's what we do if you live in a wildfire zone. That's what happens if you live in Tornado Alley. You're taking that bet. You're saying, it's not going to happen to me.
Yeah. And that's something that I don't wish on anybody, because I've people around here. I can't speak for how it is in South Florida, but there are people that are in this area, and I won't name names, that are like, oh, we'll just throw a hurricane party. Like, hurricanes aren't anything to celebrate. Like,
No,
people lose their lives, not just their homes, but their lives because of these things.
I guarantee you, when you mentioned South Florida, though, the building code is a lot stricter, a lot more strict in South Florida than it is up where you live. It's a free-for-all where you live. There's a lot of wood houses, a lot of wood apartments. They build slab-on-grade wood houses by the beach. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me what people will do, and they'll pour all their money into it. And the reality is that if you're going to spend $500,000 to build a house, or you could spend $650,000 and build a house that might actually last, I don't think people understand the consequences of making the wrong choice. We have a guy in our film who was in Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey, and it took him 7 years to get his life back to normal. 7 years.
Wow.
And he's a smart guy who knows people and knows how to get things done. And so he goes around, his name is Doug Quinn. He goes around and he's an advocate for storm victims. Because of how badly he was derailed. 7 years. And some people never recover. You don't necessarily hear those stories because they move away. They're just tragic tales. And even when you see wealthy people and they wake up the next day and everything is gone, yeah, they may have money to eventually get back on their feet, but that doesn't make it any easier when you lose everything. It's devastating and it's life altering.
Yeah, because some of that stuff you can't replace, no matter how much money you have. Like family photos, family heirlooms.
Yep.
Like you can't replace stuff like that.
No, your high school yearbook, your Letterman's jacket, your baby shoes, your teddy bear from when you were a child, pictures of your family and your family tree, people that have lost pianos, just all kinds of stuff. And when I made The Last House Standing, this woman had a suggestion for wildfires where you have a go box in a closet with a list of things you want to take. And I use the analogy to people of, if I said to you, hey, Derek, you got 10 minutes to grab some things in your house and leave, I bet you'd spend 9 minutes thinking about what you wanted to take.
Yep.
You'd go, what do I get? Where's this? Where's that?
Yep.
And it's like, that's a great idea to have a list of things you would have to grab at the last minute, because you don't think in a disaster. Nobody trains you how to think that you're going to lose everything. That's why police officers and military personnel, they train all the time so they can handle a disaster. We don't ever train. We don't prepare to panic. We just
you kick into survival mode, and that's it.
And as I used to do live shots in storms, and I was younger and I had more brain cells left at the time. When I think about it now, though, when bad things start to happen, your brain literally just locks up, and you go, "Oh my God!" You're just sitting there paralyzed, watching the TV, and going, "What do I do?" And you could replace a lot of that by just having a plan, by just thinking of things and being prepared.
Absolutely. So, talk to me about kind of the technical side of this documentary. So, like, how big was your crew, and how did you go along with getting it made?
Most of the time, it was a 4 or 5 man crew. I had a DP and then a second camera operator, And then they had a production assistant, a person who would help with lighting, and somebody who would take pictures. So you'd have production pictures of what you're shooting. And you have to keep it lean and mean because the budget for a daily shoot, if you're shooting in 4K, can be very expensive. And I didn't really know anybody here, and I went online and saw a bunch of video production companies or filmmaking companies, and I interviewed 3 of them. And this one company just really stood out. I said, "Wow, these guys do really good work." And so they show up the first day, and you're going, "Okay, what am I going to get here? How are these guys going to be?" And they far exceeded any of my expectations. I mean, these guys were so professional, so hardworking. They I used to own my own equipment, so I'd have to manage that and also direct the film. They had their own equipment. They had their own agenda. They come in and set things up so I could focus on who I'm talking to and getting the releases and doing things. So everybody had a job to do in a small crew, and it got done really well. And then they also edited the film, and they had a super talented editor who just had a great flair for putting stuff together that I would give him, taking what I did and sometimes enhancing it and making it better with, transitions from things or sound effects or different things that would go in different places. And it was really exciting because for years I had the same guys I worked with that I thought were fantastic. But when you're working with new people, there's always that learning curve. Okay, what am I getting here? What are these guys going to do? How serious are they going to be? And it was fantastic. So I'm excited to see how this film does. And I give them a lot of credits. Two Stories Media is the name of the company. And those guys were great. It was really fun working with them.
I can't stress how invaluable it is to have the right crew that can help carry your vision out into reality. Because, and with them, having their own equipment and everything, I can imagine that it had to be such a weight off your shoulders to not have to worry about that kind of stuff.
It was because the crew I worked with previously, because I'd been with these guys enough, I didn't have to worry about anything because I knew what they were going to do. With these guys, after the first day, I didn't have to worry about it because I saw what they did and I knew it was going to be good. So that was a huge help. But even when I was in television news, when I would go out and do a story, if you give it to the right editor, wow, they take that story and really make it pop. If you had a guy shooting it, the videographer that you're out with, he gets great visuals, your story's that much better. So it really is a collaborative process. And sometimes you get somebody who's phoning it in the news business, especially when I was working in Detroit, it was the union shop. And I had a live shot one day, and this guy's just moving along at his own pace. And we missed the live shot because he wasn't going to hurry if his life depended on it because he didn't have to. He was protected by the union. But most of the places I worked at were non-union. So you had people that were talented, really gifted workers at their craft that would do stuff that could make your ideas that much better. And I love it when I'm in that situation because I think I have a lot of great ideas, but if you don't have the right people with you, and I'm not a videographer, so I could shoot, but not at the level they do. Give me my iPhone and I can shoot. But a guy that knows how to work a camera, get good visuals, and then a guy that knows how to edit are invaluable.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of a conversation I had, on another episode of this show. You mentioned the videographer that was kind of phoning it in. You should treat every job like it's either your last one or that it's going to be up for a bunch of awards because you never know who's watching. It's like I think I take too much pride in what I do to ever think of doing something like that.
And most of the people I've worked with have, but every now and then you get one that doesn't. I had
Right.
a guy one time who was shooting and every shot would be shaky and you'd hear him saying on camera, well, they can just fix this in post. And so, yeah, sure. For enough time and money, you can fix anything. How about just getting good shots? How about giving me a shot that maybe we could make a little better in post, but you put it on a tripod, or if you're hand holding it, you did it. You didn't look like you had 20 cups of coffee that morning. So yeah, it sucks when you get somebody who's phoning it in. But more often than not, I've worked with really good people. I've been very lucky.
Yeah, and I'm in that same boat. I've worked with a couple that maybe weren't putting forth their effort into it, but that's the great thing is surrounding yourself with people that are talented in different ways than you, that can even be smarter than you, because you want every set you work on, whether it's a documentary or a narrative film, you want to always be learning. You always want to be trying to make it the best that it can possibly be.
Absolutely. And that's one of those things I think is interesting when you're running a business, the business of a production, because my flaw or my weakness where I think that's always held me back is the people I've partnered with to run businesses. We were all creative people, but you need somebody that's good at raising money. You need somebody that's good at crunching numbers. I mean, you need all the different strengths. You don't need to find people like you. I don't need a team of me. I need a team of people that are different than me, so they bring different ideas to the table. And sure, if it's my idea, your idea, and I'm the director, I might win more than I lose. But if you have a good idea, I'm taking it, and I'll give you credit for it, because I'm not going to take credit for something that wasn't my idea. And I like people that step up and have thoughts. Now, you can't always just free flow those things. There has to be a plan. But
Right.
when people step forward with good ideas, it only makes a project better.
Absolutely. I always like to ask this for documentary filmmakers because, as we were talking about earlier, documentaries can have that kind of raw, emotional, human emotion in it. Was there a particular moment or scenario that had an emotional impact on you while making this film?
When you're talking to victims and you see them get emotional, and you see how this one woman who lost her home in Fort Myers Beach, and her dad had canceled their insurance right before the storm. He had dementia, so when she went to file the claim after the storm, she was told they had no coverage, and you could see she was just shattered. And you have to give them that breathing space, because you want that moment. I mean, I'm not saying you want them to cry, but when they do on camera and it's real, and they're not putting water drops in their eyes and doctoring tears, it's real emotion from somebody going through it. Now, I've made a film one time where I was talking to kids who had committed suicide, tried to commit suicide. And as a father, man, I almost fell apart, so you're limited to how much you want to let that go, because it's a young person. But in this film, we had people who literally lost everything. And when you see the anguish that they're going through, it's a very painful moment. It's very sad, and it's heartbreaking. But you kind of have to let that happen so people watching it feel that. Now, I know some people create those moments. I have a hard time doing that. Like if you say something, there was that Katie Couric story years ago where she was talking to the guy that was at the cigarette industry, and she asked him a question, and they edited in a 9-second pause to a question that he would have answered right away if he had any kind of soul. Fortunately, he was recording it. And so he had the truth, and they were trying to change it. I like to let what happens happen. You sign a release, and still, if somebody came to me afterwards and said, I would like you not to use that, I probably wouldn't use it.
Yeah, because you build that level of trust, especially with people that are being vulnerable about real instances that can have really ugly results.
Yeah, one time I was interviewing a family that the mom and dad were crack addicts, and they had their children taken away. And so, before the interview, I said, "Look, I really want you to think about whether or not you want to do this, because the world is going to see you as really crummy parents. You were crack addicts and lost your children, and I don't want you to have to get the blowback from that without understanding what you're really doing." And they still wanted to do it after that. But I could never. One time when I was in the news business, the news director sent us to a house where the husband and wife were home. The husband came to the front door. Somebody shot him. He chased after the shooter, and he died a few blocks from his house. My news director wanted me to go to the house and get the reaction from the wife, who did not know her husband was dead. And I said, no. I said, I'm not doing that. I said, I'm the weatherman. You have me covering stories in the evening. I said, I'm not going to go shatter this woman's life and do that. And that's kind of the way I feel. I don't want to be part of being the bad story. If you can document it and share it with people, but things like that, I have my boundaries.
Yeah, no, and there's a difference between what you're doing with this documentary and then breaking the news that a loved one has died. So
Yeah.
that's I'm glad you have the awareness to be able to differentiate those two things. And something I'm curious about, because when you interview these people, that have these, raw and emotional and heart-wrenching stories. Is there a what's the right way to say this? Is there a method or something you do to kind of, because you obviously have to make the subject comfortable in order to tell these stories. Have you picked up any kind of like tricks or tips that you could convey as to aspiring documentary filmmakers that might be looking to be like, how can I make, my interviewees more comfortable?
Well, first of all, talk to them before you start,
Yeah.
and be a real person with them. But when you're doing the interview and you're trying to get that emotion out of them, sometimes as the person asking the questions, you want to help them get it out if they're struggling. So if I'm talking to you and you're stammering a little bit, I go, "Well, Derek, take your time, just shut up if you're asking the question." So if I ask you a question and say, "Derek, how does it feel today knowing that you lost everything?" And I see you start to fall apart, I can't save you at that point. That's the real that has to happen there. If you then look and say, "Look, can I stop for a few minutes? I need to get my composure." And then you say to me, "Could you please cut that out? I'm embarrassed." I would have no problem doing that. I'm not going to change that. But you have to get those moments, and how you get them is staying out of the way. So my goal is to get you to talk about something. And after I ask you the question, and it's painful sometimes to sit there and see you swinging in the breeze, but you got to let that happen, because that's how you get those moments. If I try to paraphrase for you or help you out, you're going to hear me in there, and I'm not even in the film, so it does nothing. You look at a Michael Moore film, and he's the film, and the other stuff just happens. Not the kind of films that a good documentary to me is about. It's the story you're talking about, and you want to let that happen.
I've always been curious as to, because every now and then on documentaries you can hear the interviewer or it might be the producer or somebody, and they'll be, talking with the person, and you can see the subtitles of what they're saying. And like I get it, but I also like I'm with you. I would rather let the person be the focus.
Yeah, sometimes you have to drop that question in. I mean, I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
have to
yeah.
do it in this film. I've managed to avoid doing that. In this film, we found I got a celebrity to do the voiceover. Dylan
Nice.
Baker is our
Okay, yeah, yeah.
voiceover person. And if you Google Dylan, he's been in a lot of films.
Hmm.
And one of the most exciting things in my career is getting to work with a guy like that. Because when we're in the audio studio and he's cutting his voice tracks, he took direction, but he also had ideas. He goes, "How about if I try it this way? Let me do this. Let me do that." And it's like, wow, this guy is a pro. And it was so exciting for me to be in that situation, to see how good he actually was when he sat down to read the copy. But sometimes that question that you ask, it doesn't work without it. It's nice if you don't have to use it, but there has to be another way to establish what that person is saying. And then when you see it in a movie, though, sometimes they had to do that.
Right. And that makes sense. Because I guess it depends on, like you said, the situation and
Mm,
the necessity of it.
yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. So, what's next for you? I know you're working on getting this film wrapped up. Do you have any other ideas in the works?
I do. And, it all comes down to having the money to do them. I have an idea for one I've been trying to raise money for the last 6 to 9 months. And I'm not a good fundraiser. I'm not a good salesman, because, first of all, in the film industry, you can't look at anybody with a straight face and get them to invest in a film and tell them you're going to make money. That
Yeah.
it's a high risk investment. When they invest, they understand that. They have to sign something saying they understand that. So you have to find people that really believe in what you're doing, and they have to care about the story. So I'm struggling to raise the money on this, um, but I think it's a great idea. And then I have another idea of a film I want to make that I'm starting to try to get the word out to see if I can come up with the money for that. But that's the great equalizer. When if you establish a certain standard that you're trying to maintain, you can't make those movies with your iPhone and a couple $1,000s. You have to raise a budget to do it, and you're not going to get the same talented people. I have kids. My kids are in their 20s, and they're into filmmaking. And I said, look, it's easy for you to get people to be in your film for nothing because you're young, and other people that are young will want to work with you. It just looks weird if I try to do that. So I got to pay everybody. So those days are over. So if I want to do a film, I got to raise the money. And that's always a challenge.
Yeah, that's the, pun intended, the $64,000 question is how
Yeah.
do you get the money? And that's something that I've very recently started to dabble in is the financing and the really like the getting in the trenches of the producing side of things. And it's like a whole nother world than just the creative side. And that's kind of been the blessing of doing this podcast is learning about those different aspects that I had no idea about, because everybody thinks of just the fun creative side, but there's the business side. Not saying that it's bad, but it's a necessity.
Well, and it's tough too. If you're a good fundraiser or if you're good at sales, the word no is not no to you. It's
Right.
not yet. You're just not ready yet. And to me, the word no literally is no. Because if somebody asks me something, hey, George, you want to do this? And I say no, we don't need to talk after that. I'm done. I told you no. And that's no. You're not going to change my mind. So unfortunately, I take that mentality into my ability to sell. It's like if somebody says they're not interested or it's not the right thing for them, I'm not real aggressive about it. And the other thing is, if you then go the crowdfunding route, to me, that's the worst. That works for certain people. If you have a large group of people that can all get behind it with you and make it an event and do it. But if you're kind of a lone wolf, crowdfunding can be very difficult. And it's very, people have their own lives. They have their own sense of urgency. I had people that are rich that wouldn't even kick in $5 or $10 when I've done crowdfunding campaigns. And some people look at you and they go, "Wow, dude, you haven't called me for 40 years, and now you want $100 for a film." And so, I think it's really that works for really social, outgoing, heavy networked people or celebrities. If Quentin Tarantino said he was doing a crowdfunding campaign tomorrow, he'd probably raise millions of dollars instantly because his films are great and you know what you're getting.
He
But
hit his goal by the end of the day
yeah.
easily.
Oh yeah. But when it's George Siegal doing it, people are going to go, what does he want my money for? What's he doing? Why is he calling me? It's a different thing. So you have to find other ways to tackle that. And it's always a challenge. It's the great equalizer. I have a lot of ideas, but it takes a while to get them off the ground.
I feel you there. Absolutely. What kind of advice could you give, or we'll say, what's one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring documentary filmmaker?
Go for it. Just even if you're just doing it to make a short and you're using 4K on your phone, try to get a Rode mic or something so you have some good sound and try to have a concept of what you're trying to do. But there's so many creative people out there that have ideas. When you're younger and you want to do it, like I say, you can get together a team of people who are all trying to cut their chops in the industry. So maybe you'll get it for a fraction of what I would get it for. When I was in the video production business, I would turn in a bid for a video. My classic all-time story is Guide Dogs of Texas. I gave the guy a $9,000 bid for the film that he wanted to make. And this was years ago, but that was stretching it. I thought I could maybe squeeze it and get it to that. And he goes to me, "Well, my nephew will do it for 1,000. Can you match that?" I said, "You want me to match your nephew's $1,000 to make this video for you?" I said, "Absolutely, I can't do that." I said, "Would you just show it to me when you're done so I can see what you got for $1,000, maybe 6 years from now when your nephew gets around to doing it in his spare time?" I never heard from the guy again, so I never saw what they ended up making. But that's the kind of stuff you run into because everybody thinks they can get a cheaper price, that it's your commodity is so readily available that if you're too high, somebody else can do it. And so I would tell any aspiring filmmaker, get together a team of people that maybe are in the same boat as you and just go out and shoot something. You may have the next great idea and you don't want the barrier to be money. And by shooting something, then maybe you can do your crowdfunding campaign. And because you're young and you're Teflon and nothing's really going to stick, you haven't been damaged by the world yet, you might hit it out of the park. But if you don't do it, you'll never know. So my voice would say to you, just try it. You have nothing to lose. Along the way, if you're shooting, just make sure you get releases from people. So if your idea is a hit, it's easier to do all the stuff that you need to do legally in the beginning than it is to try to play catch up at the end. If you made some 5-minute short and Netflix said they wanted to run it tomorrow because you just found lightning in a bottle. And then you go, wait, I don't have releases. The place I shot didn't give us permission. I used music from iTunes. Your idea's done. They're not going to use it. So why not at least understand the basic steps? So if you had success, you're ready. And they're just little things. A release is very easy to get in the beginning. It's very hard to get afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting because I interviewed an entertainment lawyer, and he said the exact same thing. Any legal stuff, get it in the beginning and as you're going along, and it's very, very hard to do it after everything's done.
Yep, and things pop up. We interviewed State Representative Hillary Cassell in our film. We were up in Tallahassee, and it was the end of the day. She had the release. She was going to sign it, and I left her office without getting it signed. Now, for me, that's a fail because she's a busy woman, and who knows when I was going to get it. It took me a week of bothering her because she was busy. The legislature was in session. But I'm stewing about it because my job as the producer was to get that right at that moment, and I've only done that twice in my career. The other time I was in an office, and the guy wanted. I was in the FEMA office in Washington D.C., and the FEMA director took the release and they changed something in it, and they said, "We want final cut of your film, or we can't do the interview." Now, no filmmaker should ever give that because you could be screwing yourself royally. The only reason at that moment, because I had the FEMA director ready to be interviewed in my film, I said okay. I regretted it after that, but I knew we were not there as an adversary to FEMA. We were there to talk about something they wanted to do. So I didn't have that conflict. Now, if I was there as a gotcha guy for FEMA, they could have said, you can't run this film. We don't like it. You have to cut that. So you don't want to give away things that are important. And I kicked myself for weeks over that one, even though I knew it wasn't going to be a problem. I just, so just follow
You can't help but think, what if?
Yeah, you can't. Oh, you know what happened that could have killed us? Brock Long was the FEMA director, but by the time the film was ready to come out, he had left. And it was a new FEMA director. So I didn't know. That's where I was really worried. It's like, well, what if he left on bad terms and they don't want him in there representing FEMA? Fortunately, I sent them the film. They signed off on it right away and said it was fine. But I will never do that again. I would, if it happened again, I would just say, I'm sorry, we can't do it. And I would just leave.
Yeah, but that's a lesson learned though, and you learn those throughout the process.
That's what all these gray hairs are from. Because those kind of moments, I'm a perfectionist. I hate making mistakes. And the two examples I've given you are two colossal mistakes. And people can make them at any time. Anybody can make them. The things you have to do is have a short memory over your mistakes because life goes on, and learn from them.
Absolutely. And in closing, do you have a website or social media you'd like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Yeah. Move the World Films is on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's Move the World Films, and Built to Last Movie. It's built and then TO, not the number 2, builttolastmovie.com. And you can go there and see what we're doing with the film. Stay in touch with the website. So I'm going to put out there when we get it picked up someplace and where it's going to air and how people can see it. And it's exciting. And I'd like people to, if you follow me on social media, you'll be more in touch with what's going on with the film. And I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, George. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to hearing the podcast.